Isaiah 53:5, but he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace, and with his wounds we are healed. That's an ESV version, but I have something to testify about that is going to build up your faith. So get ready for this testimony. So last night, my family and I went to Tennessee, which is just about an hour away for us, to go visit one of our other churches that is one of our church organization. The pastor there was a lay minister under my husband's ministry. So when he was asked to come and preach during one of their revival services, he agreed. And so we went last night. And last night, Ryan, my husband, had a really great message to challenge those who had been experiencing Christ, who had been experiencing Christ and all the things that he was doing for them, to then therefore take it out into the community. Revival doesn't just stay within the four walls. It should go out. That was the essence of his sermon. Everything was going great, and it seemed like a slow service, if that makes any sense to you. If you've ever been in like a long, stretched out version of many services back to back, like a revival week, you'll have maybe a few days where like the power of the Holy Spirit is just really strong. And then there might be one or two different days where it just seems like everything's more calm. The Holy Spirit works in different ways. So, the pastor of the church, he was speaking about how this was a different service, meaning that, the power of God wasn't so strong, but you can still feel his presence. God was still moving, but in a different way. And whenever Ryan asked me to stand up and pray for him before he preached, I felt the Holy Spirit moving very strong. And in my left hand, it was starting to actually go up my arm a little bit. I felt such a burning Holy Spirit fire that I knew it was meant for someone or something. So the service has really come to practically a close, right? Altar service had been called. There was prayer there. There wasn't like a huge move of the Spirit where people were running around or, anything like that people would consider like, well, we had church tonight, But it was after the service, the majority of people had left, and there was just like a few handfuls of us left, just chit-chatting afterwards. And one of the couples that were left, they were a little bit older, and the man come and talked to me and my husband. He spoke over us and an encouragement and showed us through his words what the Lord had been showing him. And him and his wife had been talking about how she had injured her right arm, and that they've been at the doctors today, and that quite literally throughout their whole entire day while being at the doctor's office, that the Lord had been moving. The Lord was moving with them in their consultation with the doctor, who was talking about how they would be doing surgery. She's supposed to be having surgery. She had different torn ligaments and tendons, and it's pretty much her rotary cuff was all messed up. Like, she pretty much was going to be having a lot of reconstruction surgery on her right arm. But they were just talking about how at every place that they had went, and the Lord was just moving, and that was that day before they come to service that night. And I was just excited to hear how the Lord was moving throughout their day, and I just had to stop, because in that moment, while she was explaining everything, the Lord said, "This is that moment." Now, I want you to keep in mind, too, during altar call, I went and I prayed with one lady, but I saw this lady that I was just talking to about needing surgery on her arm, and the Lord had kind of made me realize that there was like some kind of connection between me and her, and that I was supposed to be praying with her, but there was really no release to go pray for her in that moment. So I really kind of just pushed it to the back of my mind. But in this moment, as she was explaining everything, God brought back to my remembrance that feeling in my my left hand that was going up my arm, and I started to feel the Holy Spirit moving inside of me and said, you need to speak up now and tell her. So I explained to her what I just explained to you. And I said, I really need to pray with you right now. I really feel like I need to pray with you right now. And she agreed. So in that moment, I went ahead and put my left hand and stuck it right on her shoulder. And I began to pray. And as soon as I began to pray, the Holy Spirit began to fall. She and I both were speaking in tongues and prayer. And then the Lord started to give me words of knowledge to say to her. And as I was praying for her, the way that I was praying, I was unaware of this at the time, but the way that I was praying, she told me afterwards, are exactly the words that she would say when she was praying for her arm. And she said, there's no way that she would have known that those were the words that I had said in prayer. And so obviously that was just confirmation that that was the time for prayer. So I continued to pray for her, and the Holy Spirit continued to fall. And then the Lord began to speak to me, but I wanted to make sure what he said to me was not me giving any kind of false hope or me just assuming that God's going to do this because of the way that he worked everything out that night and everything. So what I heard in my spirit very clearly on my right side, which I always hear it on my right side, I heard no surgery. And I said, Lord, is this you? Because I do not want to give false hope. I don't want to speak out of turn. And it literally, the voice said it again, louder, multiple times over. And I said, okay. And I began to say it. And as I began to say it, the Holy Spirit moved even more and even heavier. And the Lord instructed me different places to place my hands on her arm and shoulder area. And then again, the Lord began to speak into my spirit. And I heard him clearly say, because of your faithfulness, you will be healed. And so I began to speak that to her. I knew that was for her. That was God's words for her. And I began to say that. And I was explaining, the Lord was just showing me very plainly all of the things that they have done today in their faithfulness. Because of their faithfulness, he was going to heal. And so I prayed for no more pain, no more swelling, no more, all the things. And after we were done praying, okay, she began to try and move her arm around and stuff. And I could tell her hesitancy. And she didn't want to do anything to hurt herself because, she couldn't raise her arm. She didn't have full range of motion in her arm whatsoever. So as we were talking there just for a little bit after we were praying, she had just dropped her tissue that was in her hand. And without thinking about it, she just bent over with her right arm, picked it up, and had full range of motion. And she just realized, she said, I just picked that up. And then she began to cry with tears of joy and excitement. And she tried to move her arm more. She said, I can move my arm. I could never move my arm back here. And she just kept on and different ways of trying to move her arm and realizing she had movement. She said, as we stood there and talked a little bit longer even after praying. And as we continued to do, there were different things that she would try to do that she could not do before. And she said, I can do that now. And it just excited me so much. And we kept praising the Lord and giving him thanks for what he had just done. What I loved the most was her sheer shock of mobility that she did not have, but now she has. And I could tell she had faith that the Lord was going to heal her. But I think it was the moment of being like, he really did heal. I am healed. I'm not going to need that surgery. I can feel it. She's like, it feels a little sore, she said, but it doesn't hurt nearly like it did, and I can move. And so I told her just continue to claim that victory and walk in that. And I just wanted to share that with you. God still heals today. And all it takes is you to step out in faith and say, yes, Lord. Claim that healing. And if you're the one that God is calling to pray for somebody, do not hesitate. Be obedient and pray for them. I hope that encourages you today to not just step out in faith for possibly your own healing or someone else that you know that needs a healing, but to be an intercessor, to be someone who steps out, who stands in the gap for someone, who walks in obedience and prays and does and says as the Holy Spirit instructs. I promise you, there's a reason behind it. And if God is leading you to it, He will see you through it in such a way where you're going to be in shock and awe and be like, wow, God really does do that. It's not just me reading about it or hearing about it in someone else's life. He does it in my life. And I just saw a woman get healed completely and never going to need surgery on that shoulder and her arm ever.